Welcome to Make and Decorate, a podcast for makers who love to sew, quilt, and decorate. Hey everyone, how are you? Happy Valentine's Day, if that's your thing. Or just happy Thursday. So, can you believe it is middle of February already? And, so I was a little wrong about the weather. We have not gotten through the worst of it. But at this point, it's like, ice storm? Pff, sure. Oh, another ice storm the very next day and night? Fine. It's just like we're so used to it by now. We're just like, what's next? That polar vortex just really kind of like, worked us over, and now we're just kind of like winter zombies. We're just like, whatever. But spring, I know it. I know spring is around the corner because my calendar tells me in March it's officially the first day of spring. So anyway, I'm banking on that. Plus, it's my birthday in March, so my birthday is technically in spring. Ah, yes, spring flowers. Let's just envision that, meditate on that. So, what's going on here? Oh, my goodness. Everyone is gearing up for Quilt Con. Oh, I'm so jealous. But I'm really excited. I mean, it's just really cool just to hear everyone getting ready, getting excited, making their plans, and me realizing that I really should have tried to plan and try to make this. I should have made this happen, but it just didn't work out. So I am going to miss it this year. But oh my goodness, I really have to get my plans together and try to make it next year. Or I don't know. They still need to announce the next location, so I want to see where they're going after Austin, because they do kind of need to come up to the Midwest, don't you think? Hello, Chicago, my kind of town. So how have you guys been doing? I know there's a lot of quilt-alongs and sew-alongs and things like that going on that people are involved in, and my one king size quilt is off to the long armors, so that's great. And then I finished a quilt top for a baby quilt. I posted pictures on Instagram, and I am quilting that on my Bernina domestic sewing machine. And I have not free motion quilted in probably close to 2 years. So I did a practice square over the weekend, and was I a little rough, little rusty, but it does come back. I mean, by the end, I was starting to get a little bit of a hang of it better, and I was like, whew, because at first I was just like, oh, no, I've forgotten how to do it all. And that'll happen. But also, I've never quilted on my new machine before either. So, that was new. And I really got a chance to utilize this stitch regulator. And there's two settings on it. There's a number 1 and a number 2. And I definitely like number 2 better. The number 1, you use your foot pedal, and I don't know, works a little differently, but the foot pedal is the main difference. The number 2 is you press a button to engage it. And then once you start moving the fabric, it starts stitching. And it is so nice because you don't have to worry about keeping the foot pedal, at an even tempo with how you're moving the quilt. So on the second setting, you just move your quilt around. But if you do start moving your quilt too fast, it'll beep at you. You can turn the sound off, but I have it on, and it's kind of like a little little beeps. And at first I was like, what is that? I know it doesn't mean anything good. I know I'm doing something wrong. So I went and looked up some videos, and then I realized that's what that meant. But it was fun. It's even though I was rusty, and my swirls have they're not perfectly round, but I am enjoying it. So we'll see. We'll see how it turns out, this baby quilt. And then I'm also starting another baby quilt, and I realized I had a charm pack with the 5-inch squares, and there's 42 of them, of Allison Glass's Road Trip. So cute. I love that fabric line. Oh, it is so pretty. All of those colors are like all colors that I love. And so I'm just going to do a simple patchwork quilt with all of the 5-inch blocks. But I need a little bit more, so I had to kind of stop on that. I laid them all out. I laid them in the order that I wanted, and it's just got to be a little wider and a little longer. So I ordered another 5-inch square pack of that. So I'm waiting for that to come in, and then I'll be able to finish that. And then I'll be able to quilt 2 baby quilts at once, I think, or one and then the other. So that's what's on my work table this week. I have made some changes or updates to my website. So when you go to the podcast page where I have the show notes, on the right-hand side, there is a little section that helps support the podcast. So I've got my donation button that you can click on if you'd like to make a one-time donation to help support the podcast with software equipment and all the subscription that it takes to actually host the podcast up to all the players. And then I also added an affiliate link. It's actually a button, and it's for Amazon. So in my podcast show notes, if I have anything that you can get from Amazon, I do put affiliate links to those products. And if you click on those, and if you happen to, make the purchase, then, I get a little something commission from it. So that really will help. So if you cannot make a one-time donation, then you can use the Amazon links. And I've got one just on the sidebar of that page where it will just take you to Amazon, and you can shop there through that link, and that will help me too. So I really, truly appreciate any help that you guys can do to support the podcast. I love doing it, and I love bringing you, these bi-weekly shows. So I just want to let you know that that's there and up and running. So yeah. And then I think we should just get into what this week's podcast is about. I have Frances O'Rourk Dowell on. We have a wonderful conversation, and Frances she has her own podcast called Off Kilter Quilt, and she's just a multi-talented person and very busy. So I was very, very happy to get the chance to talk to her. Frances is also a writer, and she has written many books. I think she specializes in young adult and children's novels and books. And she has won literary awards for a few of those books. The Edgar Award is one of them, and that's really amazing. And she has also written Quilt Fiction. And she's got some... I think the first quilt book that she had written was called Birds in the Air, and you can get that. And there is a follow-up to Birds in the Air that is going to release this year, later in the year, so I'll put a link into that, and it's called Stars Upon Stars, so be on the lookout for that. And she also has another podcast that is Quilt Fiction. It's called Friendship Album 1933, and each episode has a chapter or up to a few chapters. She wrote a novel and read it by the author, which is herself, and on this podcast. It's wonderful. I love it. I love it so much. And in addition to all of that, Frances finds the time to quilt. She makes wonderful quilts. She's into modern quilting, improv quilting, and so she does a lot of quilting, and that's what her main podcast, Off Kilter Quilt, is about. So let's get into this and talk with Frances. Hi, Frances. Welcome to my podcast. I am so thrilled that you're here on my show.
I am really happy to be here, and it's nice to meet you, not in person, but more in person than we've met before. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I am so thrilled. I'm so excited. And I can never forget your first name, Frances, because that's my middle name.
Oh, Stephanie Frances.
Yes.
My goodness.
Yes. And I really, as a kid, did not like that middle name because I got teased by the other kids because I guess it was a boy's name, but our names are spelled the feminine way.
Right. I never liked my name either. And it's funny because my mother is Frances Jane, and she goes by Jane because she did not actually like the name Frances. But we have a family tradition of using family names. And so when I was growing up, I actually had a nickname, and it was Missy, but I'm not a Melissa at all. So I just, at some point, I think when I was in my mid-20s and I was working in restaurants, and I just could not, I would fill out my social security forms and all the forms, and I just couldn't bring myself to say, yes, my name is Frances, but call me Missy. I just gave up Missy at that point. I'm like, all right, because I'm not sure Missy does menopause. And at that time, I was very, very far away from those years. I decided at some point I need to switch. And so I did. And now I actually really like the name Frances.
I like it too. And I learned to like it earlier because of Princess Diana Frances Spencer. Then I was like, it's a princess name.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, it does look so pretty written out, too, in cursive. So
yeah, it does.
Anyway, okay, good. I'm glad we like our names now. I'm going to start off with your podcast because that is how I discovered you. I don't know. I started listening to you maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and your podcast is Off Kilter Quilt. Mm-hmm. I think you even took like a little break at some point. Did you, or am I thinking of a different podcast?
Yeah, I never took an official break. A few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, my mom got really sick. She had cancer, which she recovered from, but I went for several months with really not podcasting. Uh-huh. And I have to say in the last year or so, I'm not podcasting as regularly as I would like. I would like to put out an episode every 2 weeks because I think people like that when you show up. Say you will. And it's more like every 3 weeks. But, I'm doing another podcast as well, the Quilt Fiction.
Yes.
So that's really lots and lots of fun, but that's kind of cut into my off-kilter quilt time. But we are almost this May will be 9 years of doing it.
Wow.
Pretty nonstop, except for that little bit of a break.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. I love it. And your diary journal style is so cool too. And I think that it's because I've heard other journal style podcasts, and yours, I think, because you're a writer and you're just so flowy and everything is connected and it's like a story every time I listen to your podcast. So I love that about your podcast. And I love when you record in the summer and you have all your night sounds going on. I hear crickets and then sometimes I hear birds. And so it's pretty cool. It's because you're in North Carolina, right?
North Carolina, and I have a really screen porch. So especially when, if I record in the morning or the evening, at night, they're the great bug noises. I love those. In the morning, there are lots of birds. So it is really nice to be able to sit on the porch and record and get all the wildlife. Because
they're not overwhelming. They're just kind of quietly in the background. And the first time I heard the birds, I was like, wait, what? I thought it was around me, and it wasn't. I couldn't find a bird. It was on your podcast. But I love it. And you are at 232 episodes. That is so cool. Yeah. So anyway, you've been a very good inspiration. And I have to tell you that it was probably, I don't know when you said this, but it was in previous years. that you welcomed new people into the podcasting world, and that, not so much needed to be commercial and professionally produced. And, I had been thinking of starting this podcast for 4 years before I launched it. And, I got my microphone and all this stuff in 2014, and I didn't launch it until 2018. because of, the confidence level and who's going to want to hear me, and what if I'm not professional sounding enough, and all of that. But listening to you, and there's another podcaster, Stephanie Kendron, and she helped me. And, so I just finally decided I made it my first of the year goal last year of like, you're going to do this or you're not going to do it. And I did it. And then I was like, what was I so afraid of? I love it. I really, really do. But I attribute some of that inspiration to you. And I appreciate you for saying that on your podcast, because I think you really are inspiration to others.
I'm glad, because I love podcasts. And I think you sound very professional and you do a great job. But it's not a commercial podcast. It's still in its way homemade radio, which is what I love about I love there's just a spectrum now, right? There's stuff that's almost like it's produced and sponsored and has commercial breaks, and it's often really, really well done. And then there's what we do, which is more like talking with friends and just pursuing our own interests. And I've never pursued sponsorship for the Off Kilter Quilt because I just don't want to have to then feel, because you've been very kind in describing my style, but the fact is I get rambly and I forget words and I go off on tangents, and I used to be very good about editing out ums. And I'm just now I sometimes do, if it's because some days I am just rambly, but for the most part, I like not having the pressure of having to be too professional. I try not to be boring. That's my threshold.
No, I don't think so. And you've got Travis the quilt dog, and I've got my Cooper, who's sitting right there. You can't really see him though. I don't know, like whenever you get on the phone, your pets kind of know that your attention is elsewhere. He's like that too, and like on the microphone, and I got my headphones on. He's like, "What are you doing?"
I need you to put this back on me, please. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, exactly.
So, okay. So that's about your podcast. And you mentioned your other podcast, which you launched, I think it was last year, with Quilt Fiction. And this is pretty cool. And I don't even know how you do this, because you were writing as you were recording this novel, this quilt fiction book.
It's just a really silly idea. Now I have to follow through with. I'm almost done. I'm still writing the book, and it's amazing because as my career is I'm a children's book author, and I've been publishing for 20 years, and I've been very fortunate. I make a living doing that. But a few years ago, I started writing quilt fiction and have published a novel called Birds in the Air, and then a collection of short stories. And I think this summer, I think June 1st is the pub date for the follow-up to Birds in the Air called Stars Upon Stars. But I've also for a long time been working on this 1930s quilting novel, and I decided I knew the best idea in the world is to start podcasting it, reading it out loud while I was in the process of writing it. And in some ways it has been the best idea in the world, and in other ways I wake up in the middle of the night going, oh my goodness, what have I done? But I'm almost done. The way I have it planned out is I have 5 chapters left, because there are 5 characters, and it's almost like a round robin. You visit a different character each chapter, but I am almost at 500 pages. And as someone whose career has been writing manuscripts that are around 150 pages, this is it's crazy. And it's really cool. I feel I feel like I've accomplished something just with that length and with finishing, and I am really close to the finish line, and have and people listen to it, so it's really really fun.
Yeah, I do. I'm 13 chapters behind, or episodes, not chapters, it's episodes. But I love to save it to listen to. One of my sisters lives about an hour and a half from me, and lots of times I go there and I'm driving back late at night, so I'm driving and I'm hearing the story, and it just makes the drive go so much faster. And I don't know, I just like it. So, and I love the story. I love, it reminds me a little bit of Little Women. That was one of my childhood favorite books. And just, yeah, like sisterhood and, and women that may not normally get along, get put together, and they're accomplishing a common goal. And yeah, I love it. I really like it a lot. And then in Christmas time, you released a Christmas sort of a short novel that's related to that. It's a prequel because it's a year earlier, 1932.
Right.
With the same characters, though.
The same characters, which was really fun. Although I had to, it's particularly when you're doing something over a long period of time, you can forget things. And I had in the prequel story, the Christmas story, I almost had one character get a dog. And then I remembered just by luck, I was like, oh no, her husband is allergic to dogs, which we'll find out in 1933. So it's like, oh, and so to make all the facts fit and also, writing a prequel is interesting because you have to anticipate, you can't give away too much, and you can't let your characters know what they don't know yet. So
that's crazy.
And I love doing it. And I've always wanted to write a Christmas story, so that was really
it's so cool. Yeah. I've not finished it yet. I started reading it on Kindle. And then after a week or two after I started reading it, you sent an email out of like, it's going to be available audio. I was like, what?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, that's the interesting thing. And I hear from a lot of people about Friendship Album 1933, which is the novel I'm reading, is that, they don't read as much, or they get a lot of their storytelling through audio now, through Audible books, through audiobooks and podcasts. And there were people who were so happy that we did the story on audio because, they were never going to get around to reading the print version, but they could listen to the audio version in the car, going to work or what have you. So that's, audio is huge, and on every level, but a lot of people, that's how they get their storytelling now.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, I try to kind of do it half and half, but it's tough when you just, you want to sew too. So then you can have it on at the same time.
Yes. And I feel, I watch a lot of Netflix while I'm sewing, and which means I can watch the same show or 5 different times. And the 5th time when I actually sit down to watch this, do you know what I mean? That's a whole different show because I've never actually watched it. I've only listened to something that's actually supposed to have a visual component. So it's kind of see when you actually sit down and go, oh, that's what that character looks like.
I do the same thing.
So, but it's funny, but it also gives a show a longer life for you because, half the time you miss half of the dialogue because your machine is going. So but I've watched Downton Abbey now about 500 times. Every time I catch a new thing that I missed before. So.
Right. Cool. So let's talk about your love of quilting and go back to where it all began for you. Just where you're from and how you got started and whatever your creative tendencies were leading you up to your interest in quilting.
Well, so I started making quilts in 2007, and I've always loved quilts, but I was always kind of scared of quilts because I would get books out of the library about how to make them, and there were fractions, 7/8. For some reason, to me, at one point in my life, that was the most terrifying fraction in the world. I couldn't figure it out, and then one day I realized that it was actually just basically 1. You're a 1. But for a long, I would look at the books and I would see the instructions, and I was just overwhelmed by them. And it wasn't until a couple different things happened, and one was that I discovered Gwen Marston's Liberated Quilting, and she said, don't worry about the fractions, just cut stuff up and mess around with it and play. And it was in fact really liberating. Before I made quilts, I knit. I've always loved doing crafts. I've always loved doing things with my hands, in particular I think because I'm such a word person. It's such a nice break to be nonverbal and to make things. And when I was a kid, I loved to draw, and I drew all the time, and I cartooned, and I was very into music. So I was always, and I wrote, and I was very creative, but it really took a long time to be brave enough to try quilting. And that was largely because someone said, you don't have to follow all the rules. And later, after I had made a couple quilts, I actually took a class at a quilt shop here, in Chapel Hill. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and I actually learned how to do things right, but I needed, and that's how I learn anyway. I learn by kind of messing around and messing up, and then getting comfortable enough with the process that someone can come in at that point and say, okay, here's what you're doing right, and here's what you're doing wrong. But I'd always loved quilts as things. And every time I would see a quilt, like, in somebody's house or in an antique shop or wherever, I was like, I want to do that. I very much love quilts as beautiful, useful objects. And so it was it still feels a little bit amazing to me when I look around my house. I'm like, oh, look at all these quilts, and I made them, and they're fabulous. Or, if you squint, they're really fabulous. But it just seems just a wonderful, amazing thing to me. That I do this, and that somehow with the help of a lot of other people and YouTube videos,
right.
I can do it. And it's, and there's so many, no pun intended, but there's so many layers to it. It's the making and the creating, but it's also the community and the history. All of that makes it a really rich experience for me.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I similarly for me too. I didn't start quilting until like my mid to late 30s, and I had always wanted to. I had sewn on and off, home deck and clothing, but I don't know why. When you look at a finished quilt, it is sometimes just so stunning, and you can't really, when you haven't learned to quilt yet, you can't figure out how did they get all of those pieces like that. It's too hard. It's so hard.
It doesn't. If you don't understand the 9, it's not a 9-point grid, but the grid system, and know how to look at a block and break it down. It just seems like, wow, that is so complicated and confusing. We have a couple quilts on the wall, and that's one of my husband's favorite things, is to kind of try to figure out how I did that with the more traditional blocks. I'm like, it's just triangles. It's just triangles.
It's so cool. And then, so do you like to do piecing, or what type of quilting do you? Foundation paper piecing or applique?
I kind of like it all. And it's interesting because this book, Friendship Album 1933, is set obviously in 1933. I'm doing a lot of traditional quilts right now to kind of correspond with the book. And I do enjoy it, and then I'm very happy to go all the way the other way into improv piecing. I love all quilts. I'm omnivorous as a quilt maker. Probably my favorite mode of quilt making is modern, and I do modern applique, and I love paper piecing. I've done some English paper piecing and would like to do more. But I do love a 1930s traditional quilt, and now I'm doing called the hand-pieced quilt along, that a couple of friends of mine are running, Kristen Esser and Patty Dudek, and so I'm actually hand-piecing a sampler quilt, which is very relaxing. Yeah. So, but I really do. I like jumping around to different projects. I'm fairly good about finishing projects, and it's and I enjoy having. From time to time having a pattern. Mostly I don't. Mostly I just do my own patterns or make stuff up as I go along, which is kind of how I am as a writer too. It's like, what will this be? I don't know. Let's see. Let's throw something on the design wall and go. So then to follow that with someone saying, here's what you cut out. Cut these pieces out and then sew them together. And that itself is a kind of a relief to be instructed. So I like both though.
Yeah, I think I agree. I do too, and I do like to kind of delve into. At one point, at the beginning of my quilting, I tried foundation paper piecing, and then I was like, I hate this, never again. And then I tried it again when I saw what's her name? It's New Zealand foundation paper pieces. She does these. She just last year released an animal book, and these gorgeous, beautiful polar bear and peacock paper pieced.
Yeah.
And I tried to. I'm not halfway, a third of the way through this butterfly, and it's weird because I think if you like the composition, and just kind of open yourself up to trying a new technique, then it's not as bad as what you think it is. At least for me.
You're like, I really want to make that quilt, and I'm going to figure out how to do it. Sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah.
And paper piecing is interesting for me. I'm left-handed, and weirdly, I'm not visual. it sounds weird to say, I'm not visually smart in some ways. I think there's some people who make sense of the world visually, where I tend to do it verbally. And with paper piecing, the hard thing for me, and it makes my brain twist up, is where you're having to flip stuff, flip and go backward. You know,
it starts off really backwards, especially the first couple pieces, and then once you get started,
I have found that I really enjoy the challenge of it because it doesn't come naturally to me. I don't automatically go, yes, I understand how this works. And so I mess up a lot. But sometimes when you mess up, you make really interesting discoveries. That's what I tell myself.
Yeah. Cool. And then do you machine quilt your quilts or long arm? I can't remember how you quilt them.
I machine quilt them. Okay. Not well. I'm getting better. But I just, I drive myself crazy. I can be kind of absent-minded and sometimes I tend to daydream a lot, which means I make mistakes or two things that I feel like after quilting for, 12 years now, they're mistakes I shouldn't be making. But I'm getting better with my machine quilting. I really like Jackie Gehring's Walking Foot books and her class, and she's been really helpful, and Krista Watson has been very helpful in terms of learning how to machine quilt. But I do machine quilt all of my quilts, and I will say I tend to stick to the simpler line, the simpler styles. And back in the day, I was much more interested in sort of the free motion, and now I really love the straight line. And I think, but I would love to get like a mid-arm or a long arm, because when I watch people do that, when you go to shows and it just looks like an incredible amount of fun.
It does. It's cool. And at couple of those shows that come around here, they let you try it, and it's a lot of fun. It's just
driving.
Well, plus they're pretty clever. It's the mid-arm is what I tried from HQ, and they had black fabric and like that real thick 40 weight variegated, colorful thread. Yeah. Anything you quilted on there looked fabulous. It's just
I must have that machine.
I know.
I think that would be. It just looks fun to me. I would never want to do it professionally.
Right.
I admire people who do it professionally, but that would be a kind of pressure when you start asking people for money. It becomes a different game. But I would love to do it for myself.
Oh, cool. That's really cool. And what sizes of quilts do you normally make? Are they more like lap sizes, or do you do the big bed size?
Well, my goodness, Stephanie, I did for a quilt to go with the Friendship Album 1933. I made a pink and white Crown of Thorns quilt. It's a really pretty pattern. I saw
a picture of that. Yeah.
But it ended up being huge because, again, I just kind of do things on the fly, and my math skills are minimal, and so so I'm like, oh, this will be about 70 by 90, and it's just like it's a mile long and a mile wide, and I quilted it on my Bernina, and I have to tell you, I ran into some problems just through my own inexperience of working with a quilt that size. So it was actually kind of disappointing in the end because it didn't look as good as I wanted it to. That, for me, that's a huge quilt. So it turned out to be like a king size quilt. Typically I do, lap size and twin size quilts, but at some point you feel like, okay, I've got enough of these, I need, and try to do more bedside quilts. But that is one thing as a machine quilter. That's so hard. But I do like making quilts just to try things and make things. And so at that point, with that, a lap size or a twin size quilt is just the perfect size to do that.
Yeah. I haven't really machine quilted anything larger than let's say a lap size so far. I've made, some king size tops, but I've sent them to be long armed. And that's only because I made them for people. So I didn't want to be responsible for quilting it.
Right. Now that's what I am machine quilting a baby quilt right now, and I just feel like I'm flying. It's like,
those are the most fun because they're small enough and
they're not dragging down. Like with the Crown of Thorns, I'm like, I have like 20 pounds of quilt over my shoulder. I felt like I was,
Yeah,
it was.
and even putting binding on, let's say, like, because these couple of king size quilts I made, I did the binding after it came back from the long armor. That's still a ton of fabric to run through your machine to attach the front of the binding. I did the hand sewn on the back, but
even with the weight of that quilt, even to attach the binding, which is a pretty simple thing to do by machine, but you're finding, that you just have to control it so much so that your binding is actually on and firmly attached. It was that's I'm not doing that again. I'm done.
Oh man. Well, and then you have a quilt accepted into Quilt Con this year. It's called Sit In, right? I'm just doing this by memory of what it was called.
Yeah.
Sit In. It's the chairs.
It's the chairs. I always called it the chair quilt, and but I was looking for a better name, and my friend Jen came up with Sit In, which I really like because it's rows of applique chairs. They're all solids. They're different colors. I made a template based on a sketching of a chair by an artist I like a lot named Beverly Buchanan. It's a rustic wooden chair shape. And so, and I did them, they're facing different directions and they're different settings. And I really love the name Sit In for it, although it gives it more of a political edge than it was actually intended. But it was such a clever name. And of course I had to use it. But yeah, so that will be in Nashville, and I'm excited to see it. And I stayed very sane. I just mailed it, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. And, I didn't do anything to it other than I ironed it and, folded it very neatly and put it in a plastic bag and put it in a box. But I had some quilts a couple of years ago where one I ended up totally requilting it. So I sent it, and I made a promise to myself and made the mistake of telling my friend this promise because she held me to it. I said, if I get anything in Quilt Con this year, it goes as it is. And then when I told my friend Kristen, I'm like, I think I'm going to requilt some of it. And she's like, no, you made a promise. I'm like, okay. So that was very sane. I felt very sane as I put it in the box. Like, here it is, world.
Oh, good. Yeah, I remember listening to your podcast as you were making it. So that's what I like about your journal, because you just kind of go over the progress and, all the challenges you may have had, and, when you finally finish it. And so that's really cool. And I mean, do you often enter quilts into shows, or?
I have entered quilts into Quilt Con for the last 3 years. Last year I entered Sit In and it did not get in, and I entered another quilt also. So I did not get anything in last year, and this year I entered 2 quilts, and one of which was Sit In, and Sit In got in. And I always remind myself that it's like every year, it's about the judges and it's about the show they're curating. Because you do, if you follow Instagram with all the Quilt Con rejects, and you see amazing quilts that don't get in the show. But the thing, that's my favorite show. And I don't know that I'm truly a show quilter. Part of the reason that I enter Quilt Con is, I'm in the Modern Quilt Guild. I'm very active in my local guild. And so it just feels like, I want to be a part of this. It matters to me. I love the show, and I think that it gets better every year, and the quilts get better every year. But I also feel with Modern Quilt Guild, there may be a little more latitude for imperfectionists such as myself, where I feel like, like Paducah or something.
I agree, because if I were to enter a quilt, I sometimes I think about it, but it's just I've never done it before. So, and I've heard, what those more established shows require, and I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, I don't.
But there's something, again, I think that with Quilt Con, there's more and more attention to that kind of detail, but I think it's weighed out or balanced out too with a real interest in innovative, quilting and piecing and design, so that your quilt doesn't have, there are quilts that are very close to perfect. So I don't want to suggest that it's, it's right. A show that someone's putting on in their garage. It's a very high quality show, but I think there are a lot of things taken into consideration. Whereas my sense, and I suppose I could be wrong, is that with shows like, with the bigger traditional shows that you can't even get in the gate if your T's and aren't crossed or whatever, and I suspect if I sent a picture into like Paducah, I would be laughed off whatever the screen or the computer, they would go, no, we don't think so. So I don't even know if that's true, but right. I don't have the confidence in the finer skills of quilting.
Yeah. Because that one I do know they really look for perfection, and I kind of get that because if it's a competition or whatever, but yeah. I do think that Quilt Con would be a good place to start, or even like that one show that's the outdoor out in the Pacific Northwest.
Sisters,
yeah, that looks pretty cool too.
Does, and it would be an excuse to go to Oregon,
right? Yeah,
but, that has a different vibe to it, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. Yeah. So kind of a little bit more relaxed and not so much, because just my personality type. I'm just, I research things, and I, have been trained just even in my education with. I took piano lessons for 12 years and interior design, and it's all about perfection, and that's what you do. So I've had to relax my own self over the years, and sewing and quilting has actually taught me to not try it does, because things don't get finished. When I was really trying to be a perfectionist, I wasn't having fun, and I was struggling and just trying too hard to get it perfect. Once I started to and that I think too came around from podcast shows, listening to people talk about what they're making and how they're making it, and I'm like, what am I doing to myself?
Right. Well, that's what, and I so often think, especially, getting a little away from the official judging of quilts, but when it's just regular, we're much harder on ourselves than anyone else. No, people, even at my quilt guild, when we do show and tell, no one's looking for that place where your needle jumped while you are doing machine quilting or checking on your seams. They're taking pleasure in the quilt and the colors and the design. No, you're the only one who notices these little things. And what's interesting is that if you're working on a quilt and it's so in your face, and you just sew everything that's wrong, you see it, but if you put it away for a little while and you come back to it, a lot of times what was that? What was bothering me about this? And it is, when we're making our quilts, we are really close physically to them, and we can be really hard on ourselves without stepping back and seeing literally the big picture of the quilt we've created.
It's true. It really is true. And just one time that I really noticed it was when I made a baby quilt for one of my sisters, and that was the first time that I really took the leap of this free motion. And I just kind of did my own little did loop-de-loops, and then I made these little hearts because it was a baby girl. Yeah. And just kind of meandered it all over. And of course there's mistakes and whatever, but it was my sister, so I knew she would be kind of forgiving about it. Her reaction was, this is the most amazing thing I have ever seen. And I was just like, really? I'm getting ready to explain all my little oh, sorry about that. No, right. Then I was oh, I'm not going to show you any of the errors.
Yeah, just step away from the quilt. Yes, it is lovely. Yeah. No, totally. And that's when you're giving quilts to the muggles, it's even better because they have no idea what they're supposed to be looking for. They're like, a quilt? I didn't even know people still made quilts. It's very, but they really appreciate what you've done for them,
Right. And I think that's why we as quilters stay with it, because of that part, and, just the joy that it brings. And then, I don't know, I just keep learning. I love to learn, and I love the community, like you said, that goes along with it. It's really just, it grows, and I just learn from everyone. So I just love that.
Well,
Yeah.
it's exciting because you can start at a pretty basic level and make a quilt that's pleasing and that works, right? It keeps the body warm. But there's always something new to learn. And sometimes, like with paper piecing, sometimes we're resistant to that. But when you take on the new skill, I mean, especially as adults we are done with our formal education. And in some ways have gotten in our adult ruts. And so to have this thing where we're continually learning and everything we learn makes our quilts better and it's really fun, like doing this hand piece quilt along that I'm doing. It's just like, oh, this is so great. It reminds me of like when when you first learn something and you just want to do it all the time. And I know I will look back at this early hand piecing and go, wow, that was not good. But right now, because I'll get better. But I love that idea that I don't think we will ever, as quilters, run out of things to learn and to get better at, and new skills and new techniques. And that's, I think as humans, we're built for that. I think we're built to make things and joy from the making, but to continually learn and explore and discover. And so it's all there with quilting. It's all there.
I know. And then plus the fabrics. Let's
Yes.
get into that.
Yeah.
So what fabrics, some people, love solids or just prints, but I like them both. But
Yes.
let's hear from you, like what your preference is.
I work a lot with solids. And some of that is the modern me. Some of that is the me that gets overwhelmed and forgets to play. And I think that prints ask more of you as a designer. But at the same time, again, going back to my hand piece quilt along, I went and bought fabrics the other day. I'm really excited. We have a new fabric store near us here in Durham, which is just very cool. And I thought, I'm just going to go pick out a couple half yards and I'm going to do prints. And it was so much fun. But because it was just two prints that needed to work together, it wasn't overwhelming. Like, oh my goodness, I have to pull these 8 or 9 fabrics to work. And it was really exciting. And I'll tell you, I am not someone who knows designers. I mean, obviously, if I see K Facet, I know it. If I see Tula Pink, I know it. Otherwise, I'm kind of like, oh, that's really cute. And that's about it for what I have to say about the designer. There's certain sometimes online I'll realize I keep looking at fabrics and like, oh, I like that, I like that, I like that, and it's the same designer. But I don't have the brain cells left to really invest in being able to distinguish designers. But I think because I have worked for the last 5 years so much in solids that I'm kind of ready to do more with prints again. I did when I was first quilting and using patterns all the time, and had a great fabric store in Chapel Hill, Thimble Pleasures, where they would help me pick things. I think my early quilts, there are a lot more prints, but I went pretty quickly into batiks because batiks are easier to kind of mix and match.
Yeah, they're like blenders almost, right?
They're blenders, yes, I think. And so you're really, your number one focus is color. With prints, it's not just the color, it's also scale. And so that can be, again, I'm someone who, for whatever reason, I just can't take in too much information at once. I'm a slow learner. But I'm kind of excited now about the idea of like, I think I'm going to play more with prints. I just feel like there's more and more good stuff out there. It's beautiful. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And I gravitate to all that artistic, like watercolory type of fabric prints and stuff like that too. So I just like it all. I mean, I love fabrics totally. Just even coming in from my interior design background. But that is so different though than quilting.
Well, yeah,
because of the scale,
right,
of the fabric, and for draperies and sofas, you need a little bit of a bigger scale of pattern and stuff. So I had to learn that when I very first started quilting, because I would get these like large, printed. And then you cut them up and you just totally lose that perspective
Right. That's a learning curve. And I feel like in some ways I'm back on that road and back at that curve where you realize, yeah, you can look at this big bolt of fabric and you have to remember it's like, yes, but you're cutting it into 2.5 inches. And that makes it a different thing.
Right.
But yeah, and I would think too with interior design and decorating that texture plays a role that
Yes.
not in quilting, although maybe we try to, I don't know. Nah, I'm not even going to go there, but yes.
For me, it does, because that's why I haven't done very many solid, like totally solid quilts, because to me it's very flat. But some of these quilters have developed a way to create that texture with their patterns, and really, yeah. So, and I'm starting to challenge myself more and more with the solids, but I also love getting those textured solids that are out there, and some people call them low volumes too. But like even I love the linen cotton blend fabrics, like from Robert Kaufman. That Essex linen is a go-to for me when I like mix solids into a quilt. I'll do some flat cotton solids, but I always want to put in like that little linen texture in there. And it gives it something.
Well, and particularly, I've got that great Roderick Karakoff book I think it's called Under the Radar. It's quilts like between 1940 and 2000, but it's a lot of these, they're quilts that he has collected over the years. And they're, not necessarily traditional in terms of their fabrics. And so they're made out of bed sheets and old curtains and linens, and so and that way these really interesting textures are created. And of course you see quilts and the G-spin quilts are where you see the denims
and the corduroys. I love that.
Talk more about texture is a thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Learn something. It is, but yes, but I do think in modern quilting, yes, with the solids, where that texture is created is in the quilting, which right. and I really, and I know there are a lot of traditional quilters like it's over quilted, but it's like I mean but I love what that adds to the overall feel and look of the quilt. Yeah,
it's pretty cool. It's fascinating to me. I love it. So all right, we got through fabrics, and there's. For binding, do you do mostly machine binding, or do you do the hand binding?
I do hand. I mean, I attach the front with the machine and then hand bind. Flip it over. Hand binding, if that's what you mean. Yeah, always. Yeah. No, I'm not going to say that. My early quilts, when I was just making it up as I was going along, I had no idea how to do binding. And you know how blankets have like the thick satin?
Yes.
I thought, well, that's how it should be like an inch or two.
Right.
And I also just machine quilted on at the same, you just kind of fold it over and go, and then I was done. I took my class, learned many things, and one that had binding all the way along. But that was the thing. I remember doing a quilt, and this was before I took classes, and it was an Amy Butler pattern that I actually didn't know was a quilt because she called it a throw. And it wasn't until later when a friend said, "Oh, that's a nice quilt you're making." And I said, "No, it's a throw." And she said, "No, it's a quilt." But she actually was someone who had done sewing. I don't know if she'd done quilting, but I was standing there and I could not, like, reading the directions about the binding and how to attach it. And I could not for the life of me figure it out. And she came up, she's like, "This is what you do. And then you flip it over." She was able to look at the instructions and get it like that. Whereas it just wasn't an automatic translation from here. I'm reading, and
I have to see it too, because I have a couple of books, like one of Nancy. What's her name? Nancy.
Nancy Demon, Nancy Crow, Nancy.
The Nancy who had the TV show for 30 years. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't remember her name. But anyway, I have her books, and there's these, they're not photographs, they're just like those schematic drawings. And when you go do the corners of the bindings and you fold that up at that 45, that is very hard to illustrate in a book and to see and comprehend. So It wasn't until I actually saw someone doing it in
That's
person or
and
on, a video that
yeah.
I could really like get that. And I think
Uh,
sometimes it's like
Absolutely.
that.
I have it's I guess it's not crafts anymore. I guess it's blueprint, but a class on bindings and finishings, and the teacher's name is Mimi something, and she's fabulous. And from her, I learned how to do how to close up the binding in a really neat way. But I still have to watch her, and I will take my computer and kind of put it here, and so that Mimi and I are standing next to each other. Because I have to be. If she's across from me, I will flip. I won't do it right,
Right.
but I still have to watch it. But as long as I'm watching, then I can imitate.
Yeah.
But yeah, but looking at pictures, again, I get that brain scramble. I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm smart in other ways. I really am.
Well, you're not the only one.
Thank goodness.
And I hear so many, like more of the modern quilters coming up, love to machine bind their quilt. And I will do it on baby quilts for sure. Cause
Yeah.
they don't care and it's fine.
Yeah.
But I just haven't perfected it enough for the bigger quilts that I like the way that my machine binding looks. I still have to work on it. So
Yeah.
I still just do like the hand, because it's not that, to me it's not that bad. It's kind of like a relaxing thing to do.
I find it
Hmm.
as well. I enjoy that when because you're right. It's the last thing you do, and you just kind of sit down in front of the TV or listen to music or a podcast, and you do it, and it just I find it very relaxing. So yeah, I agree. I have not tried to machine bind anything since my early days where I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's just, and I see them do it, and they're just like, okay, just stitch in the ditch here, and the front is fine. Or they put the back on first and then roll it over to the front, so that what you see on the front is very presentable. But when you go to the back, there's just that little flap of fabric still that's under the stitching that I just, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine to me too. No.
So you're going to Quilt Con this year then?
I am. I'm really
It's not
excited.
too far from you, Tennessee, right? Yeah.
It's not that far. It's going to be about an 8-hour drive. I'm going with my friends from the Quilt Alliance, and I'm on the board of the Quilt Alliance,
Oh, yeah.
which is a nonprofit that works to document quilts and quilt stories, which, I'm all about the quilt stories.
Yeah.
And so we are all driving together, and I'm already trying to plan for how tired I will be, because I'm a total introvert. Like after we're done talking, I will have to go rest and have some tea. Because this is about as social as I get on a Tuesday afternoon. But
Preach into the choir.
yeah, and so when I think about QuiltCon, I mean, it'll be so fun, but I have to plan ahead. I have to take breaks. But when you're there, it's like you want to talk to everybody, and you'll meet up with friends who you only know, through online communities and all of that. And so it's so exciting, and yet I just will be totally zapped by it. So
I haven't been yet. I want to go to a QuiltCon, but I made a decision to go to this other retreat in September because it was Sarah Lawson's. She wasn't going to have any more of them in the near future. So and she's local, and the retreat was local to me, so I had to go. It was for bag making. So yeah, I gave up for this year, but I will need to go to QuiltCon sometime. I just want to experience it.
Yeah, I think it's a great show, and in some ways, it's really like an art show, and that's that's one of the great things. It's just the quilts. The people are great, the excitement and energy, but really taking in the quilts, and I like thinking about quilts and what's going on in quilt making right now. So, as far as shows go, it's been my favorite.
Yeah, I it's funny because QuiltCon also gives you people who don't go or can't go, they still feel like they have some sort of an experience with it just from all the Instagram stories and people, talking about it. So I do get even a lot out of not even attending, but I must go. But they need to come up to Chicago. There's a convention center in Rosemont, and they haven't been to the Midwest yet. So
Are you in Chicago?
I am, yes.
So are you really cold today then?
It is freezing. For the next 3 days, we are going to have wind chill temperatures of -30 to -50. So tomorrow and Thursday are going to be the worst, and even my husband's company is closing down. So it's pretty serious when all the schools definitely will close down, but when businesses start closing down, you know it's pretty bad.
I was texting with my sister-in-law there. And, I mean, and I couldn't believe she was going to work today. And I said, here in North Carolina, we close school and everything. The roads, it's all closed before the first snowflake hits the ground.
Oh my gosh.
The whole state would be, shut
We would
down.
have to shut down for 3 months then.
And I am mocked mercilessly by my sister-in-law for how wimpy I am. I said, one day it was 40. And I said, oh, I'm cold. And he said, are you really cold? Is that cold to you? I'm like, yeah, it really is. So anyway, but yes, there is a great convention center on the south side. I've gone to a lot of library convention stuff. The
McCormick?
Yeah, the McCormick.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, that is huge. So there is space for Quilt Con in Chicago, and I think do it.
Yeah, so I think they should too. Okay, if you're listening, Quilt Con, come up here. Yeah. Just don't come up here in January. That's all.
That's right. Yes, that is. Yeah, February in Chicago, but that would make the prices cheaper.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
February or March, and they did send a survey out asking like if better times of the year, like even April or March. So who knows? Maybe they'll even push that back from February. We'll see.
Yeah.
Just wanted to. This is the last topic, but I just it's funny because I feel like I know you because of your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I kind of like just asked you. Then when I started to prepare for this recording, I went to your website and I had not been to that yet. And I immediately got choked up and like panicked because you are a award-winning author. I mean, like, I had no idea that you wrote all of these children's books, win awards, young adult teen, that Dovey Coe won that Edgar.
It did.
Allan Poe Award, or is it Edgar Poe Awards?
It's just the Edgar.
I looked it up, the Edgar Awards. I know, and I was like, oh my goodness.
Which is weird because I didn't write it as a mystery. I don't even read mysteries. And so when my editor, this was my first book. It came out in 2000. And so when my editor called and said, it's been nominated for an Edgar. And I said, why? And she said, I have no idea. But there is a murder in it. Yeah, I had to talk to my lawyer, older brother. I'm like, I don't know why. And he's like, well, at the beginning, someone gets murdered. And at the end, they figure out who did it. I'm like, yeah.
That would qualify as a mystery.
But I was shocked that it actually won. I'm like, oh, I fooled them. That's cool. But yeah, so that was that. It's such a great award to have won, but I don't feel like I really earned it.
I don't know. I think so.
Like it's been intentional in my reading of the mystery.
Pretty prolific author, and just your website is beautiful and it's so easy to navigate. But I love that you do this. There's a tab on there for creative writing for kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty fantastic. And
I'm about to, I don't know when this book is coming out, but I actually I'm working on a creative writing book for kids. I teach, I love teaching children to write, and have an ongoing creative writing workshop with a small group of girls who we've been together now for almost 4 years. But yeah, so I love teaching, but as an introvert, I have found that I just can't do it. I have a minor in education, but like being in a school all week would, I couldn't. I'm much better suited.
It would deplete you completely.
It would, and I'm better suited to writing and then doing the teaching on the side a little bit. But yeah, so that's a really fun thing to do and to write about. And kids are so courageous and enthusiastic. The ones who really want to write, not all. I've met
and I mean, I wish I had this resource when I was a kid, because I was out. It's weird because I've even told my husband, I'm like, oh, I just wish I could just write a book. How do they do that? How do these novelists just sit down and, I know there's like a technique to it. Like you have to have a protagonist and a antagonist. I don't even know what I'm talking about. So that's just not even.
Right. No, you just have to have a story, but it's like, it's like anything creative. It's a process and there's a lot of messing up and you have to be willing to write a really bad first draft, and I think quilt design is like that too. because I really love that part. I love making up my own designs, but I also understand that often as I'm trying to translate what I have in my head, the images in my head to my design wall, there's a lot of disconnect there. But I've done it long enough and I've written long enough to know, yes, you can start off with something that's not at all what you thought it would be, and you can make it much, much better. But I think that's what separates a lot of people who want to write or quilt or what have you, is that they think that they should start out the gate and what they make should look great or be a great story. It's like, it doesn't really work like that. You have to, there's always a learning curve. Mm-hmm. There's always a lot of practice involved in getting good at anything. And writing's the same way. And I've written a lot of really bad fiction. And I wrote a lot of bad fiction before I started writing okay fiction,
Yeah, but it's refreshing to see, because I think that something like that, a resource for kids, is great for today. Because even for adults, the challenges of reading today, amidst in our environment with technology, with social media, when I was growing up, we didn't have the internet or social media. We really played. We really read. I read a ton. I read all the Ramona and Beeses, The Little Women, Charlotte's Web. So I kind of and you've kind of inspired that with me, is just get myself back to reading more and, watching. I watch a lot of TV, so it's a challenge to myself.
I feel the same way. And I was just thinking about it today. It's so easy to get distracted. And at this point, when I read, I have to have all my devices in another room, because you'll come across something and go, oh, I need to look that up.
So true.
Or, that makes me think, and so, and particularly reading fiction, the distraction is your enemy, because you get pushed out of the story. But I also think that human beings just in general need storytelling. And the fact is, there's a lot of good TV. There just is. It's not. So I'm 54. So I grew up in with some really crap TV. But some good. No, mostly it's just really bad. But when you think of, a show. One of my favorite shows is The Wire, and it's operatic and novelistic, and there are a lot of shows like that. Yeah, that just. And have fully developed characters and really interesting plot lines, and so I don't think that should be discounted.
Right.
But at the same time, I do miss reading the way that when you're a kid and you really
Me too. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, just because when you're reading, it really fosters creativity. I feel, because you have to, you the way you read, and you're the imagination that you have to paint this picture in your mind while you're reading the story. And it's not going to be the same as someone else who's reading the same story. For me, I am painting this visual picture in my head when I read a novel or a story, that, what I think is going on, even what the characters look like and how they're dressed and, all of that.
And there's it's interesting, because we share a love of Little Women, and I will watch any Little Women production that comes down the pike. Like the new one, I don't know if you saw the one that was recently on PBS.
I haven't seen it yet.
And it's on, it may be on Amazon Prime now. It's amazing. I think it's the best one.
Oh, I need to look for that. Yeah.
And and I'm happy to experience the different ways of presenting the character and the different takes on the story. But other stories, I will never watch the movie, because the movies can so quickly replace what you've imagined, and you lose what you've imagined. Whereas Little Women just stands up to all of it. Little Women takes no prisoners. There's nothing that they can do to your Little Women that's in your head. But others, it's like Harriet the Spy was a book I love. I would never watch that movie. British Athea, never will I ever watch that movie. And it may be a great movie, but I don't want it to colonize my imagination.
Right.
They're so visually powerful. But that is the great thing about reading, is you're creating this world.
Right.
And that's what it's so fun to talk to younger readers. Although at this point, Harry Potter's pretty old. It's 20 years old. Yeah. But these girls in my writing group who grew up with Harry Potter and who they're in high school, and they still, like, every summer will reread the whole series, and how much they lived inside of that book and that story and took that story with them. I can, on the school bus and, and walked around pretending they were magic, just waiting for their invitation to Hogwarts. But that whole world that Jake created, and then as readers we fully inhabit and make our own, it's very cool. And I don't think movies do that as much. Maybe not.
Right. I know, because even like for my husband, he's definitely a voracious reader. Even today, I mean, he reads books on his phone. I'm like, how can you read that? It's so tiny. But he reads these books. He loves these certain authors, and but like, when he was a kid, he loved The Hobbit and all of those, and those are definitely very imaginative. It's just amazing to think of where the author came up with all of this.
And especially because he came up with languages.
Yes.
The Elven and all that. You're just like,
and a map.
And a map and a whole, he created this, worlds within worlds. It's amazing to me what he did.
Well, Frances, thank you so much. I mean, I could just talk to you forever. I say this to everybody. This is why I love doing the podcast.
Yeah.
It just gives me an opportunity to really just, have these wonderful conversations with people that are, you're in North Carolina, and I spoke to someone in the Netherlands. So this is fantastic.
This has been so much fun, Stephanie. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for coming. I really love it. And when is your follow-up book coming out? Is it coming out this year? This Stars Upon Stars, is it?
The plan is for it to be out June 1st.
Okay, good.
We have pushed that pub date back and back and back, but that's where this time I'm sticking to it.
But it's this year. Okay, so mid-year. That's great. And then I'm going to put in my show notes links to your websites. Both, you have a quiltfiction.com website, and your main website and your podcast, so that people can find everything. I mean, I'm sure, but I mean, everybody, it's so funny because as a podcaster, you have to pull back and think, you think everybody knows everybody by now, but there's some people that don't. So yeah.
So it's the world we live in our quilt world. It's a pretty big world with a lot of different spheres. So I know there's a modern quilter. There are people who are like huge to me, and I have a friend who's not into modern quilting, and they're like, never heard of her. And you're like, how is that possible? What is wrong?
I know. Yeah. So all that information will be there on the show notes. And so thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime soon in the future.
Okay, great.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, so that was an awesome conversation I had with Frances O'Rourk Dowell, and check her out, her podcast, the Off Kilter Quilt. I listen to it on iTunes. I'm sure it's available on most platforms available. The same as for my podcast. It's available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and also I always embed it every week into my show notes so you can listen to it directly from my website. Enjoy a wonderful weekend, and for those of you lucky enough to go to Quilt Con, I just have the time of your life. Oh, I am so jelly, but that's okay. I will make it to a Quilt Con. I will. Hopefully next year in Austin. We'll see, but I've got to go. Okay, take care, and I will talk to you next time. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Make and Decorate podcast. You can find me at stephaniesochadesign.com. Check out the podcast blog with the show notes. My donation button is there for a one-time donation to support the podcast, or you can also support the podcast with my Amazon affiliate, and that button is just below the donation button. Talk to you next time. Bye.